Most organizations treat Microsoft 365 Copilot as just another feature rollout, and they see it as a simple productivity toggle that you just turn on. But the top 1% understand the truth. This isn't a software upgrade, it is a structural audit of your entire digital estate. The reason your pilot is currently stalling isn't the technology or the model itself. It is the open by default permission model that has been rotting in your SharePoint environment for a decade. We built hierarchies for a world that no longer exists, and we optimized for easy sharing and discovery at the cost of control. And now, we are giving an LLM a high-powered flashlight to find every sensitive file you forgot to delete. In the next 90 minutes, we are dismantling the assumption that modern work starts with navigation. It starts with context and a rigid governance framework. If you don't fix the foundation now, you aren't deploying a productivity tool, you are deploying a data exfiltration engine. The illusion of out-of-the-box security. The flaw isn't the AI, and it never was. The flaw is the assumption that respecting permissions is the same thing as being secure. In the old world, we relied on obscurity because we assumed that if a file was buried 5 folders deep in a site called Project X, nobody would find it unless they were looking for it. Most admins think that if a user has technical access, Copilot is safe to use. But in reality, your users have access to thousands of files they shouldn't even know exist. We have spent years ignoring those everyone except external users groups, and we used them as a shortcut to avoid help desk tickets. And Copilot just made that administrative laziness a critical liability. The model doesn't just read your data, it synthesizes it. It creates new dark data that escapes your traditional perimeter. You publish the content and then nobody uses it. It sits there, silent, until the AI finds it and reveals a confidential salary spreadsheet to a junior analyst during a routine query about team performance. We have to stop pretending that our legacy information architecture is ready for machine speed retrieval, because it simply isn't. When we talk about security out of the box, Microsoft is telling the truth when they say Copilot will not show a user a file they don't have permission to see. That is the baseline, but that baseline assumes your permissions are correct. For 90% of the enterprises I walk into, they are not. They are a mess of inherited rights, broken links, and ghost users. If you have a SharePoint site that was created in 2017 and it is still using the default shared with everyone setting, Copilot is going to index every single word on that site. It is going to use those words to answer prompts, and that is where the system breaks. This creates a phenomenon I call the visibility gap. In the pre-AI era, the gap between what a user could access and what they actually accessed was massive. People generally stayed in their own lanes because finding other people's lanes was tedious and time-consuming. Copilot closes that gap instantly, and it makes your most obscure data your most accessible data. If a sensitive document is technically open, it is now functionally public within your tenant. This isn't just about accidental discovery either. It is about the synthesis of information across boundaries. An AI can take a piece of information from a public marketing folder and combine it with a stray comment in a semi-private Teams chat to reveal a strategic pivot before it is announced. This dark data is the byproduct of an LLM connecting dots that no human had the time or inclination to connect. We are moving into an era where traditional perimeters mean nothing. Your firewall doesn't care about a prompt, and your antivirus doesn't care about a meeting summary. The perimeter has shifted to the data itself. We need to move from a trust by default architecture, where we assume internal users are safe and permissions are mostly right, to a verify by context model. This means that access isn't just about a checkbox in a security group, it is about why the data is being accessed and what the AI is doing with it. Think about your current SharePoint estate and how many sites are orphaned. How many teams were created for a 1-week project 3 years ago and never deleted? All of that is fuel for the model. Every draft, every rejected proposal, and every old version of a contract is now part of the truth the AI uses to generate responses. If you haven't cleaned up your data debt, your AI is going to be hallucinating based on outdated facts that were technically still accessible. This is the illusion of out-of-the-box security. It is the belief that the software will protect you from your own lack of governance, but it won't. It will only reflect the state of your data back at you, but at a scale and speed that makes errors impossible to ignore. We have to look at the architecture as a living system. If the system is cluttered, the AI is dangerous. If the system is open, the AI is an exfiltration risk. We need to stop looking at the settings and start looking at the structure. But to fix the architecture, we have to look at the new attack vectors that didn't exist 2 years ago. We have to look past the file level and see how the interaction itself is the new vulnerability. Beyond permissions, the new attack surface. Copilot isn't being hacked in the way we're used to. You won't find a virus signature or a suspicious file sitting on a hard drive in this new landscape. Instead, the system is being manipulated through natural language control flows. This is a fundamental shift. We are moving from an era of code execution to an era of instruction smuggling. In the past, security was about keeping bad code out of your environment, but now it's about keeping bad instructions out of the model's context window. This is where things break, because in reality, your current firewall is completely blind to these threats. It can see a packet of data, but it cannot see the malicious intent hidden inside a paragraph of text. Indirect prompt injection is the new SQL injection for the generative era. And the scary part? Your employees are the primary targets. An attacker doesn't need your password or a complex zero-day exploit to compromise your data. They just need to send an email or share a document that Copilot's Retrieval Augmented Generation, or RAG pipeline, is going to ingest. Think about how RAG actually works. The model looks for relevant information across your entire tenant to ground its response. If an attacker places a malicious instruction inside a document that the model retrieves, the AI can't always distinguish between the user's intent and the attacker's command. It treats all retrieved text as part of the truth. We've seen this play out with vulnerabilities like echo leak and reprompt. These aren't just technical bugs that you can patch and forget. They are structural scope violations. They exploit the lack of a clear trust boundary between instructions and content. In a traditional application, the code is separate from the data. You don't execute the data. But in a large language model, the data is the code. If Copilot can read a source, it can be tricked into treating that source as a command. This is a scope violation because the model is taking orders from an untrusted third party simply because that party's text was included in the search results. Take a look at echo leak. This vulnerability allowed attackers to exfiltrate sensitive information from a user's context without the user ever asking for it. The attacker sends an email with a specific markdown formatted payload. When the user asks Copilot to summarize their morning emails, the model ingests that payload. The payload then instructs the model to secretly send a summary of the user's last 10 files to an external server. The user sees a helpful summary, the attacker sees your strategic plan, and the entire transaction happened over standard HTTPS channels that look perfectly legitimate to your security operations center. Then there's reprompt. This was a single-click data exfiltration attack that targeted the way Copilot handles URL parameters. An attacker could craft a link that, when clicked, injected specific prompts directly into the assistant. It then chained follow-up instructions to coax the model into leaking data over multiple turns. It bypassed enterprise-style controls by exploiting the trust we place in legitimate-looking Microsoft URLs. It's a persistence-like pattern. One click starts a sequence that the attacker's server continues to control. Your user thinks they are just using a shortcut. In reality, they are opening a door. What we are seeing is a shift in the threat model. We used to worry about people getting into the system. Now, we have to worry about what the system is reading once it's already inside. If you have an open RAG pipeline that pulls from external web sources or unvetted emails, you're essentially allowing untrusted input to influence your most powerful internal interpreter. The model becomes a model-assisted exfiltration tool. It's not just about what the AI knows, it's about who is allowed to tell the AI what to do. This is why respecting permissions is an insufficient defense. An attacker doesn't need to break your permissions if they can just trick the model into using the permissions you've already granted. If I can send you an email that causes your Copilot to summarize your private payroll files and send that summary to me, your SharePoint permissions didn't fail. The model's instruction tracking failed. We are dealing with a trust boundary problem. Your current security stack is designed to protect the where and the who. It is not designed to protect the what of a natural language interaction. This risk isn't uniform across the company, though. Some users are more exposed than others. Some data is more dangerous than others, which is why we have to tier the rollout. We can't treat every user like they have the same risk profile. The Gartner adoption risk tiering model. Turn it on for everyone is a strategy for disaster. Yet that is exactly what I see in the middle market. It is a land grab for productivity that ignores the basic laws of gravity. The top performers, the organizations actually realizing value without a headline-making breach, are not doing that. They are using a risk-tiered approach. This is the model Gartner has been advocating since the early days of the Purview. It is a recognition that your organizational readiness is not a single number. It is a spectrum. You have pockets of excellence and pockets of absolute chaos. You cannot treat them the same. We have to move away from the binary on or off switch. Instead, we think in tiers. This allows us to sequence the rollout based on the maturity of the data and the sophistication of the user. Tier 0 is where most of you should be right now, but you aren't. Tier 0 isn't actually about AI. It is about remediation. It is the phase where you pay your data debt. You are running the oversharing reports. You are identifying the toxic combinations where highly sensitive intellectual property meets a shared with everyone link. In Tier 0, nobody has a license yet. You are cleaning up the content sprawl before the first prompt is ever written. If you skip this, you are just automating your existing failures. You are making your mess more efficient. Once the baseline is established, you move to Tier 1. These are your low-risk, trusted users. Think IT, the digital workplace team, or a dedicated AI center of excellence. These people understand the guardrails. They know what a hallucination looks like. They are the ones testing your initial configurations. They are validating that your sensitivity labels are actually triggering the right blocks in the Copilot pane. You are not looking for massive ROI in Tier 1, you are looking for technical validation. You are proving that the engine works in a controlled environment. Tier 2 is where you expand to broader knowledge workers. These are roles with moderate risk, marketing, sales operations, or general administration. The data here is internal, but it isn't the crown jewels. You are using this tier to scale your adoption patterns. You are looking at the telemetry to see which prompts are actually working. And this is where you conduct your A/B testing, comparing teams with the assistant against those without it. You are building the business case in Tier 2, but you are still keeping the most sensitive domains at arm's length. High-risk domains like finance, HR, and legal belong in Tier 3. Period. These are the areas where a single leaked document can lead to a regulatory investigation or a commercial disaster. You do not enable Copilot here until your controls are proven. You need to see that your data loss prevention rules are firing 100% of the time. You need to know that your retention policies are capturing every interaction. Tier 3 is the zero trust zone. You only move data into this tier once it has been thoroughly classified and protected. The goal is to move fast, but only in safe zones where the data debt has been fully paid. This tiered approach acts as a bridge. It allows you to capture early ROI in the low-risk areas while you continue the heavy lifting of governance maturity in the background. It solves the executive trust paradox. You can tell the board that you are deploying AI, but you can also tell the auditors that you haven't exposed the payroll files yet. You are matching the technology to the maturity of the environment. Gartner's research from late 2025 showed that 40% of organizations experience deployment delays of 3 months or more due to oversharing concerns. Tiering prevents that total stall. It allows progress in the green zones while the red zones are being remediated. If you treat this as a uniform rollout, you will eventually hit a wall. A security officer will see a report, panic, and pull the plug on the entire project. Tiering prevents that whiplash. It gives you a roadmap that everyone can agree on. IT gets to manage the risk, the business gets to see the progress, and the executives get a predictable path to value. But tiering is just a strategy. It is a map. To actually drive the car, you need a technical engine that can enforce these boundaries in real time. Once the tiers are set, we need a technical engine to enforce them, and that engine is Purview. This is where the theory becomes operational reality. Purview as the governance backbone. You cannot responsibly deploy Copilot at scale without a Microsoft Purview strategy because it is the de facto governance layer for your entire environment. In the past, many of you viewed Purview as a simple compliance checkbox or a dusty corner of the tenant where you set up a few retention labels to satisfy an auditor once a year. That world is gone, and Purview has evolved into a real-time data security posture management hub that acts as the central nervous system of your AI deployment. It is the only place where you can actually see the data feeding the model and, more importantly, identify exactly where the gaps are. If you aren't using Purview, you are flying blind because Copilot is a voracious consumer of information that wants to index every single thing it can find. Purview is the only tool that allows you to tell the model no, which is why we are moving from a world of static lists to policy-driven dynamic classification. Think about how you used to manage access by creating a security group, adding people to it, and pointing that group at a site. It was manual, it was brittle, and it was almost always out of date. With Purview, we use adaptive scopes to include or exclude entire SharePoint sites based on attributes, metadata, or sensitivity labels. If a site is tagged as restricted, the adaptive scope automatically pulls it out of the Copilot index without any manual intervention required. This shift represents a move from administrative overhead to governance by design, where the policy does all the heavy lifting for your team. If a file isn't labeled, it isn't governed, and if it isn't governed, the top 1% of organizations are deciding that Copilot shouldn't touch it. They are setting a baseline that says the model will only ground its responses in data that has a verified sensitivity label. This forces the business to take data classification seriously because you can't just dump files into a folder and expect the AI to work miracles. It also provides a safety net where the Purview engine knows exactly what the AI is allowed to do with a document labeled highly confidential. The AI hub inside Purview is your new mission control, and it gives you a consolidated view of your AI risk by showing which users are interacting with specific data types. It isn't just about blocking access, but rather about visibility and allowing you to spot patterns before they become major security incidents. If you see a spike in financial detections in the HR department's Copilot prompts, you know you have a training issue or a permission leak that needs immediate attention. You can investigate the Activity Explorer and see the exact prompt and the exact file that triggered the alert, which is the difference between guessing and knowing. We are also seeing Purview integrate deeply with the lifecycle of the content itself, which means it handles the data you have today and the data the AI creates tomorrow. We need a system that can track the lineage of information to ensure that security properties follow the data as it is transformed by the model. If Copilot takes 3 internal documents and 1 confidential document to create a summary, Purview handles that label inheritance automatically to keep the summary confidential. This prevents the laundering of sensitive information, where a user asks for a summary of a protected file just to get around the original restrictions. Without this backbone, your tiering strategy is just a piece of paper because you lack the technical enforcement to make your rules a reality. You need the ability to turn off web grounding for specific groups and block third-party plugins that haven't been vetted by your security team. Purview provides these granular controls and gives you the confidence to move from tier 1 to tier 3 because you have the telemetry to prove your policies work. You aren't just hoping that users do the right thing, but rather you are ensuring it through code and technical guardrails. Labeling is only half the battle, so we also need to look at how we protect the interaction itself. The DLP shift, workload versus interaction. Traditional data loss prevention was designed for a world of rigid boundaries, where data lived in files that moved across endpoints or through email gateways. You set a rule to look for a social security number or a credit card string, and if that string tried to cross a perimeter, the system blocked it. It was binary, it was reactive, and it focused entirely on the what and the where of the data movement. But Copilot has fundamentally changed the nature of how data moves, and in 2026 we are realizing the old model of DLP is insufficient. It simply doesn't understand the how of a generative interaction. We are seeing a massive shift in the security landscape that requires us to distinguish between workload DLP and interaction DLP. This is a critical distinction that most IT leaders are missing right now. And it starts with understanding that M365 DLP is your classic foundation. It watches your SharePoint sites and your OneDrive folders to ensure that a highly confidential file doesn't get shared with an external guest. But Copilot DLP is different because it governs the AI interaction layer itself and sits between the user's prompt and the model's response. It is the only thing standing between a productive session and a massive data leak. Think about the workflow of a typical prompt where a user asks a question and Copilot retrieves internal data to ground that answer. The model might also reach out to an external web search to provide current context, and this is the moment of maximum risk for your organization. If that prompt contains sensitive information and you haven't configured your interaction DLP, you are effectively broadcasting your internal secrets to a public search engine. In late 2025, Microsoft introduced real-time evaluation of prompts for sensitive information types, and this was a game changer for stopping data before it hits the web. This isn't just about blocking everything because that is the old way of thinking that stops productivity in its tracks. Interaction DLP allows for contextual grounding, which means if the system detects a risky sit in a prompt, it doesn't have to shut down the session. Instead, it can force the AI to stay within your internal Microsoft graph and sever the link to the external web entirely. You get the answer you need, but the sensitive context never leaves your tenant, which is verified by context in action. It's a dynamic bridge that adjusts based on the risk profile of the specific question being asked. You need both layers because you need classic DLP for the files and emails, but you need Copilot DLP for the prompts and the generated responses. If you only have the classic layer, a user can't share a sensitive file, but they can ask Copilot to summarize that file and copy-paste that summary. The classic DLP won't see it because it's looking for a file rather than a string of text in a chat window. Copilot DLP closes that gap by treating the interaction as a data-bearing event and evaluating the output of the model against your policies. We are seeing organizations move toward a prompt-level protection strategy, where every single interaction is screened for PCI, PII, and PHI data. If a user pastes a customer's credit card number into a prompt to ask for a transaction summary, the DLP engine catches it instantly. It blocks the response and alerts the security team, which prevents the model from even processing the request in the first place. This is the only way to scale AI in a regulated environment because you cannot rely on user training alone. You need a technical guardrail that operates at the speed of the model. But there is a catch because this level of enforcement requires a mature classification strategy to be effective. If your assets are poorly defined or if your sensitivity labels are applied inconsistently, your interaction DLP will be full of false positives. It will frustrate your users and kill your adoption rates, which is why we emphasize that Purview is the backbone of the entire stack. The labels provide the context, the SIDs provide the detection, and the DLP provides the enforcement to keep everything in sync. When these three things work together, you have a governable AI environment where users can experiment safely. You have to look at your egress paths because Microsoft has identified roughly 14 different ways data can leave the tenant via Copilot. This includes everything from printing and downloading to browser-based copy-pasting, and your interaction DLP has to cover all of them to be effective. We are moving toward a world where the prompt is the new perimeter, and if you can govern the prompt, you can govern the AI. But even with the best DLP in the world, the biggest risk remains the data people have already shared too widely. We have to address the oversharing multiplier before it spirals out of control and look at the legacy debt hiding in plain sight. Preventing the oversharing multiplier. We need to have a very honest conversation about the state of your SharePoint hierarchy. Copilot doesn't break your permissions, and it never has. It actually respects them with a level of precision that should terrify you, because in reality the model exposes the consequences of a decade of poor permission management at machine speed. What used to be a manageable mess is now a high-velocity liability. I call this the oversharing multiplier. It is the phenomenon where a single legacy mistake in a folder setting becomes the primary source of truth for an AI assistant. The everyone links are the silent killers of AI security. Most organizations have thousands of these. They were created by a well-meaning project manager in 2019 who just wanted to make a file accessible for a quick meeting. They clicked share with everyone in the organization because it was the path of least resistance. Back then, that link sat in an inbox or a chat thread, and it was functionally invisible unless you had the specific URL. But to a large language model, that link is a wide open door. Copilot doesn't need to find the link in an email because it sees the underlying permission attribute in the graph. It indexes the content because you technically told it that everyone is allowed to see it. This is where we encounter what I call toxic combinations. This happens when your most sensitive data meets your broadest internal access. Think about a merger and acquisition document that was accidentally saved to a public general channel in Teams. Or think about a list of employee performance reviews stored in a folder where the everyone except external users group was added during a migration. Individually, a messy folder is a nuisance. Combined with an AI that can summarize that folder in 3 seconds, it is a breach waiting to happen. You aren't just oversharing a file, you're oversharing the context of your entire business. Many of you are looking for a quick fix. You want a magic button in the admin center that makes this go away. Microsoft gave us a temporary tool called restricted SharePoint search. You can think of this as a panic button for the AI era. It allows you to limit the scope of Copilot's search to a specific list of sites. It is a powerful way to stop the bleeding during your initial rollout. If you know your legacy sites are a disaster, you can exclude them from the index entirely while you work on remediation. But here's the problem. Restricted SharePoint search isn't a long-term solution for a broken architecture. It is a band-aid on a structural wound. If you rely on search restrictions forever, you're essentially crippling your AI. You're paying for a tool that can't see the data it needs to be useful. The goal of Copilot is to surface the right information at the right time. If you hide all your information because you're afraid of your own permissions, you won't get the ROI you were promised. The real fix isn't a setting in the tenant. It is a structural cleanup of your SharePoint and Teams estate. You have to go back to the basics of information architecture. This means moving away from the everything is open mentality. You need to start thinking about data stewardship as a core business function. The oversharing baseline report is your most important tool in this phase. It shows you exactly which sites have the highest risk of exposure. It highlights the sites with the most anyone links and the most guest access. You have to use this data to prioritize your remediation. You can't fix 10,000 sites at once, but you can fix the top 20 sites that contain 80% of your risk. This is how you pay the data debt. You target the toxic combinations first. You find the places where PII or financial data is sitting in a public bucket. Once you secure those, the risk profile of your Copilot deployment drops. You are building a sustainable foundation for every AI agent you will eventually deploy. This structural cleanup is the only way to move from Tier 0 to Tier 1 with confidence. It is the hard work that makes the magic possible. We built these systems for a world where humans did the searching. Now that the machines are doing the searching, the rules have changed. You can't hide behind obscurity anymore. You have to be secure by design or you'll be exposed by default. When you move files into contextual containers, you are giving the model the boundaries it needs to be helpful without being dangerous. It is the difference between a quiet library and a pile of loose papers. Once the data is clean, we have to look at what the AI is actually creating. Lifecycle management of AI-generated content. We need to talk about the content explosion. Copilot is not just a consumer, it is a massive producer. It is modifying and creating data at machine speed. Every time a user asks for a summary of a meeting or a draft of a proposal, a new digital asset is born. This creates a secondary sprawl problem that most governance frameworks are completely ignoring. We spent the last decade trying to manage human-generated clutter. Now we are facing an era where the majority of your tenants' data will eventually be AI-generated. This synthetic sprawl is a unique risk because it often lacks the intentionality of human authorship. The first thing you have to solve is label propagation. This is a non-negotiable technical requirement. In the old model, a user would read a sensitive file and then manually decide how to label their own summary. That was slow, but it was a deliberate human checkpoint. With Copilot, that checkpoint is gone. If the AI drafts a summary of a highly confidential file, that summary must inherit the highly confidential label by default. There can be no gap. If the security properties don't follow the data as it is transformed, you are essentially allowing the AI to launder your secrets into unprotected formats. Microsoft has enabled this inheritance, but you have to configure it. You have to ensure that the output is always as secured as its most restrictive source. Think about the volume. An active user might generate 10 summaries a day. Multiply that by 1,000 users. That is 50,000 new documents every week. If you don't have automated retention settings, your tenant is going to become a digital landfill. We have to move away from the idea that everything should be kept forever. In the generative era, defensible deletion is the goal. You need to be able to prove to auditors and regulators that you are not just hoarding AI-generated clutter. You need policies that automatically capture, review, and delete AI artifacts based on their age and sensitivity. If an AI-generated draft hasn't been touched in 90 days, why is it still in your index? This is where Purview's lifecycle management tools become your best friend. You can set retention labels that apply specifically to AI-generated content. You can dictate that meeting recaps are deleted after 6 months unless they are explicitly tagged for a project. This reduces your surface area for future AI queries. Remember, the model uses your existing data as its truth. If your tenant is filled with 10 different AI-generated versions of the same project plan, the model is going to get confused. It is going to start hallucinating based on the noise it created itself. You are essentially poisoning your own well if you don't clean up the synthetic artifacts. We also have to consider the provenance of the information. In a legal or regulatory context, you need to know what was written by a human and what was generated by a machine. This is about more than just a watermark. It is about the metadata. Your governance framework should ensure that AI-generated content is identifiable in your audit logs. If a junior analyst presents a report that contains a massive error, you need to know if that error was a human mistake or an unverified AI hallucination. This accountability is the foundation of trust. You can't hold people responsible for the final output if you can't see the process that created it. Effective lifecycle management is about maintaining the integrity of the system over time. It is about ensuring that your data remains fresh, accurate, and governed. We are shifting from managing files to managing streams of information. If you don't have a plan for how that information is retired, your AI is going to become less useful every single day. It will be buried under the weight of its own previous outputs. We need to build a circular economy for our data where we are constantly pruning the old to make room for the new. This is the only way to keep the model grounded in current reality. But technical controls only work if the people behind the prompts know the rules. We have to bridge the gap between the software and the human. We have to address the prompt literacy gap before the technical guardrails become a source of frustration. Consistent education is the final layer of the stack. The prompt literacy governance gap. We spend millions on licenses and thousands of hours on technical implementation. We lock down the sites, we configure the labels. But then, we hand the keys to a workforce that doesn't know how to drive a car they've never seen before. This is the prompt literacy governance gap. It's the silent killer of ROI. If your users don't understand how to interact with the model, your entire deployment is just a very expensive search engine. Most people approach the prompt box with the same habits they developed in Google. They type 2 words and hope for the best. When the AI gives them a generic response, they blame the technology. They say it's not useful, but the flaw isn't in the model, it's in the instruction. Prompting isn't just about asking, it's about engineering a specific outcome. The best performing organizations are teaching their people a 4-part framework: goal, context, instructions, and constraints. If you miss any of these, the AI has to guess. And when an AI guesses, it often hallucinations. We need to teach users that they are the directors of the scene. They have to provide the goal. What exactly do they want? They have to provide the context. Who is this for? They have to provide the specific instructions. How should the information be structured? And finally, they have to provide the constraints. What should be avoided? This is the core of literacy. Because when people understand the logic behind the machine, they stop fighting the tool and start directing the output. Section 9. Crafting the AI usage policy for 2026. Use AI responsibly is not a policy. It is a platitude. It's the kind of vague, well-meaning sentence that legal teams love because it sounds safe, but it is functionally useless for a workforce trying to navigate a complex digital landscape. If your policy is built on abstractions, your employees will fill those gaps with their own assumptions. And in the generative era, an employee's assumption is a liability you cannot afford to carry. We need to move away from policy theater and start building productivity infrastructure. This means your AI usage policy for 2026 must be direct, specific, and grounded in the actual mechanics of how work gets done. It needs to be the manual that gives people the confidence to experiment without fear of a compliance breach. The first pillar of a modern policy is the definition of AI eligibility. You cannot have a blanket yes or no for the entire tenant. You have to map your rules directly to your data classification taxonomy. Your policy must state in no uncertain terms which data buckets are open for AI grounding and which are strictly off-limits. For example, public and internal data might be AI eligible for all users. Confidential data might be restricted to specific departments or roles that have completed advanced training. And restricted or highly confidential data, the trade secrets, the unannounced M&A plans, the individual health records, should be hard-coded as AI prohibited until a specific exception is granted. This creates a clear map for the employee. They don't have to guess if they are allowed to summarize a specific folder. The policy tells them exactly where the boundaries are. The second pillar is the absolute clarification of accountability. We are seeing a dangerous trend where people treat AI output as a finished product. They assume that if the machine said it, it must be verified. Your policy must dismantle this. It has to establish that the human is always, without exception, responsible for the final deliverable. Whether the AI wrote 10% or 90% of the content, the person who hits send or publish owns every word, every fact, and every potential error. This isn't just a legal shield for the company, it is a psychological guardrail for the employee. It forces the human in the loop. It ensures that Copilot remains an assistant, not an autonomous agent. If a hallucination makes it into a client proposal, you shouldn't be looking at the model. You should be looking at the policy that failed to enforce a verification step. Transparency is the third pillar, and it is becoming the new global standard. In 2026, we are moving past the black box era. Your policy should require employees to disclose when AI has been used for substantial portions of a deliverable. This isn't about shaming people for using tools. It's about maintaining the integrity of the professional relationship. If a consultant uses Copilot to generate 40 pages of a strategic review, the client has a right to know. If an engineer uses a coding assistant to refactor a legacy database, the review team needs to see that history. Disclosure builds trust. It allows for a more focused review of the areas where AI is known to struggle, like complex logic or specific citations. Finally, the policy must define the egress rules. You need to be explicit about where AI-generated content can live. Can a summary of an internal meeting be shared on a public social media platform? Can an AI-drafted response to a customer be sent without a second human eyes on check? These are the friction points where data leaks happen. Your policy acts as the rules of the road. It provides the why behind the technical blocks. When a user hits a DLP warning, they shouldn't feel like they are being punished by IT. They should recognize that they are hitting a guardrail defined by the company's commitment to data integrity. This shift in perspective is what turns a restrictive document into a foundational asset. It gives your team the freedom to move fast because they know exactly where the edges of the cliff are. Policy is the theory that guides the practice. But as we move forward, we have to realize that policy alone is just a static document. To make it real, we need to see what is actually happening inside the interaction. Policy is the theory, but monitoring is the reality. Monitoring the AI hub in Purview. You've built the walls and written the rules, but in a complex enterprise, those rules are just a baseline. They represent a snapshot of what you want to happen, whereas the telemetry tells you what is actually happening on the ground. This is where the AI hub in Microsoft Purview changes the game because it serves as your central dashboard for reality. It is the one place where you stop guessing and start observing the actual flow of intelligence across your entire tenant. Most admins spend their time digging through logs that only tell them about files, but the AI hub tells you about intent. It shows you exactly where your users, your apps, and your most sensitive data intersect. Think about that visibility gap we discussed earlier. You might have 10,000 users with a Copilot license, but without a centralized monitoring hub, you have no idea if they are summarizing a lunch menu or a secret product roadmap. The AI hub visualizes this usage by breaking down interactions by application, whether that is Word, Teams, or Outlook. But the real power lies in the data sensitivity overlay. You can see in real time how many prompts are touching data labeled as confidential or restricted, and you can see which departments are the most aggressive users of the model. One of the most critical metrics you'll find here is sensitive interactions per AI app. This isn't just a number, it's a diagnostic tool. If you see that your HR team has a high volume of interactions involving financial sensitive information types, you have found a structural risk that needs your attention. The ROI paradox. Why pilots stall? Finding enough ROI to justify a broad deployment is the biggest hurdle for IT leaders in 2026. The problem is that most people are looking for value in the wrong places, and we are living through what I call an ROI paradox. On one hand, the anecdotal evidence is staggering. You hear about a developer saving half their day on documentation, or a project manager summarizing 3 hours of meetings in seconds, and it feels like a win. But on the other hand, when the CFO looks at the line item for 5,000 licenses, they don't see the needle moving on the bottom line. They see a massive increase in the Microsoft 365 bill without a corresponding decrease in operational expenses, and this is where the friction lives. The truth is that 95% of pilots fail, but it isn't because the technology is broken. The model is fine, the API is stable, and the latency is improving every day. Pilots fail because the business foundation is broken. We treat Copilot like a software update that happens to the user rather than a process transformation that requires the user to change how they work. If you just turn it on and hope for the best, you are not running a pilot. You are running an expensive experiment in curiosity, and curiosity doesn't pay the bills. Strategy does. We are seeing a commercial disaster in organizations that refuse to do the math. They buy the seats, they send out a getting started email, and then they wait for the magic to happen. But magic isn't a business metric. To justify a $30 per user per month premium, you need to quantify the minutes per day math. If your fully loaded labor cost is $50 an hour, Copilot needs to save a user roughly 9 minutes a week just to break even on the license. That sounds easy, but if that user spends those saved 9 minutes scrolling through more internal emails, you haven't created value. You've just shifted the waste from one bucket to another. ROI isn't driven by the number of seats you buy, it's driven by adoption maturity. This is the distinction between having the tool and using the tool to solve a specific problem. The organizations that are winning are the ones that stop asking, what can Copilot do? And start asking, which specific business process can we automate today? Measuring realized value versus potential value. Most executives are currently drowning in potential value. You've seen the marketing slides. You've read the reports claiming billions in global productivity gains, but you can't pay your shareholders with potential. You can't reinvest theoretical minutes into your product roadmap. This is where the pilot to production pipeline usually leaks. We have to stop talking about time saved as if it's a currency. In the real world, time saved is a soft metric. It's an indicator, not an outcome. If an employee saves 30 minutes on a Friday afternoon and uses it to leave early, that's a lifestyle benefit for them, but it's a zero-sum game for the organization. To find the ROI, we have to talk about capacity created. This is the hard metric. Capacity created is the delta between what your team can do now and what they could do yesterday. It is the ability to take on more volume without adding headcount. It is the ability to shift a senior analyst from data cleaning to strategic forecasting. When you measure capacity, you aren't looking at a stopwatch. You are looking at the output of the business unit. Are we processing more invoices? Are we drafting more proposals? Are we closing the month-end books in 3 days instead of 5? If the answer is no, then your time saved is just hidden slack in the system. We need to move beyond generic productivity claims and start looking at cycle time reduction in specific functions. This is the diagnostic layer of governance. Let's look at sales. If your sales team uses Copilot to summarize meeting notes and draft follow-up emails, and that results in closing deals 10% faster, you have found realized value. That 10% reduction in cycle time translates directly to your cash flow. It means your capital is working harder. It means your win rate likely increases because you are more responsive than the competition. That is ROI. But compare that to the alternative. What if your sales team uses Copilot to generate more internal status reports? What if they use it to draft longer, more complex emails to their own managers? That isn't value, that is noise. You are using a high-powered AI to lubricate the bureaucracy. You are making it easier to generate the very digital clutter that was slowing you down in the first place. This is why governance must include a value filter. You have to define what good looks like for each role. If the AI is being used to automate low-value internal communication, you aren't scaling productivity, you are scaling overhead. So how do you prove the difference? You stop relying on sentiment surveys. Do you like Copilot? Is a useless question. Of course they like it. It makes their lives easier. But ease isn't a financial statement. The top 1% are using rigorous A/B testing. They are taking 2 identical teams, same region, same product, same target, and giving Copilot to only one of them. Then they track them for 90 days against real business outcomes. They don't look at how many prompts were written. They look at the revenue generated per head. They look at the error rates in the contracts. They look at the customer satisfaction scores. The control group is your baseline for reality. It accounts for seasonal shifts and market volatility. If both groups see a 5% lift in productivity, then Copilot isn't the driver. The market is. But if the Copilot-enabled team sees a 15% lift in throughput, while the control group stays flat, you have your justification, you have a hard number that you can take to the board. You can show that the $30 license fee is returning $300 in realized capacity. This is the shift from policy theater to operational reality. You are treating AI like any other capital expenditure. You are demanding a return on your digital estate. But as we scale this realized value, we encounter the citizen developer risk. When people see results, they want more automation. They start building their own agents. And that's where boundaries blur. We move from user as consumer to user as creator. This is actually where the model breaks. Governing the citizen AI agent. We need to acknowledge a fundamental shift in the power dynamic of your tenant. We are entering the age of the creator. With the maturity of Copilot Studio, your business users are no longer just asking questions. They are building agents. They are creating custom assistants designed to perform specific roles within their departments. The problem is that we still treat these agents like office macros or simple spreadsheets. We look at a custom bot built by a marketing lead and think of it as a helpful little tool. In reality, that agent is a business system. When a business user connects an agent to a customer database or a legacy ERP system, they are performing an act of software engineering, but they are doing it without the traditional safety nets of the software development lifecycle. They aren't thinking about versioning. They aren't thinking about regression testing. And they almost certainly aren't thinking about the security posture of the connectors they just enabled. This is how shadow AI takes root. It starts with a specific problem. A logistics team wants a bot that can check shipping statuses and update a tracking sheet. It's a great use case. So they open Copilot Studio, they build the agent, they point it at a few data sources, and then they share it with the whole department. Suddenly you have a business-critical process running on an unvetted, unmanaged bot. If that bot fails, the logistics team stops working. If that bot has a logic error, your tracking data is compromised. The risk isn't just that the bot is wrong. The risk is that the bot is invisible. It doesn't know it exists. Security hasn't reviewed the data flow. The business unit is now dependent on a system that has no support model. This is the citizen AI trap. You want the innovation, but you can't afford the instability. Governance in this phase isn't about blocking creation. It's about creating a path for it. You need a tiered approach to agent deployment. If an agent is for personal use, the rules are light. If an agent is shared with a team, the rules tighten. If an agent connects to production data, it must go through a formal review. You are moving from a world of users to a world of developers. And your governance model has to catch up, because if it doesn't, you aren't building a digital estate. You are building a digital minefield, and thus the impact on internal audit procedures. Internal audit is currently facing a massive structural identity crisis. For decades, the entire department lived on a diet of manual sampling, where you would pick 50 invoices out of 10,000, check the signatures, and call it a day. You simply assumed that the small sample represented the whole. But in a world where business logic is being generated by a model on the fly, sampling is no longer a safety net, it is a blindfold. If an AI agent summarizes a contract incorrectly, it does not do it consistently across every single document. It might get 900 right and then suddenly hallucinate on the 901st because of a specific markdown tag in the source file. Your traditional audit procedures cannot catch that kind of nonlinear risk, which means the old way of checking boxes is officially dead. This is why internal audit is moving into a dual role. They are now required to use AI to audit, and simultaneously, they have to audit the AI itself. This is not just a change in tools, but rather a fundamental change in the philosophy of oversight. We are shifting toward what I call continuous assurance. Instead of a retrospective look at what happened 6 months ago, auditors are becoming part of the real-time telemetry stream. They are using AI to interpret massive flows of control test results. They are not looking at the documents anymore. They are looking at the patterns of the model's behavior. When we talk about auditing with AI, we are talking about full population anomaly detection. Think about your expense reports for a moment. Instead of an auditor manually checking a few random receipts, you have an AI agent that scans every single transaction in the tenant. It looks for the patterns we discussed earlier, like sensitive data moving to unapproved sites or prompts that reveal a pattern of instruction smuggling. The auditor's job shifts from finding the needle to evaluating why the needle was there in the first place. They become the interpreters of the AI's findings. They are no longer just recorders of history. They are analysts of the present. But the harder part is auditing the AI itself. This is where the governance framework meets the messy reality of the black box. Internal audit now has a mandate to evaluate whether human in the loop is actually happening or if it is just a line in a policy document. They are checking for instruction smuggling risks. They are looking at your Copilot studio agents and asking where the testing log is, who owns the versioning, and how you verified that this agent does not follow commands hidden in an external email. They are auditing the logic of the prompt, not just the beauty of the output. This requires a complete overhaul of the audit toolkit. The spreadsheet is being replaced by the model evaluator. Auditors need to understand how RAG pipelines work, and they need to know how to spot a scope violation. If the audit team does not understand the difference between a system message and a user prompt, they cannot effectively evaluate the risk of the system. This creates a massive upskilling requirement. Your auditors have to become systems architects in their own right. They have to be able to look at a Purview dashboard and understand if the DLP blocks are actually catching the right interactions. One of the most critical shifts is the move toward defensible analytics. In the past, an auditor's work paper was a record of what they saw, but now it is a record of how the AI was configured to see. They are auditing the control environment of the model. They are verifying that the sensitivity labels are propagating correctly and checking that the restricted search settings are being honored. They are no longer auditing the data. They are auditing the governance engine that manages the data. This shift in audit is the ultimate reality check for your AI strategy. It moves the conversation from what we hope the AI does to what we can prove the AI did. It provides the evidence that the board and the regulators are going to demand. If your internal audit team is not yet in the room during your Copilot design sessions, you are building a system that will fail its first inspection. They need to be there to define the auditability requirements before the first license is assigned. They are the ones who will ultimately sign off on the safety of the system. This evolution in the audit function is not just about compliance, it is about trust. It provides the structural verification that allows leadership to sleep at night. But this leads us to a deeper problem. Even with the best audit procedures in the world, we are seeing a gap at the very top of the organization. There is a tension between the desire for innovation and the fear of the unknown. We call this the executive trust paradox, and it is the final barrier to production. The executive trust paradox. Leaders in 2026 are living through a profound contradiction. On one hand, they express high confidence in the strategic necessity of generative AI. They see the competitive landscape shifting and understand that standing still is a recipe for irrelevance. On the other hand, their readiness to actually govern these systems is at an all-time low. We call this the executive trust paradox. It is a state of psychological and operational paralysis where the pressure to deploy meets the fear of a catastrophic data event. It is the reason so many enterprise projects are currently stuck in a perpetual loop of evaluation without ever reaching the production line. The data reveals the depth of this anxiety. Recent leadership studies show that 57% of organizations cite data reliability as their primary barrier to full-scale AI production. It is not that the executives do not want the productivity, it is that they do not trust the foundation the productivity is built upon. They are self-aware enough to know that their internal information architecture is a legacy mess. They know that if they flip the switch today, the AI will be hallucinating based on outdated files and surfacing sensitive records that should have been deleted years ago. This creates a massive friction point. The board is demanding a roadmap for AI native growth, while the security team is sounding the alarm about the oversharing multiplier we discussed earlier. This paradox manifests as a pendulum swing between two equally dangerous extremes. Some leaders are stuck in overcautious delay. They are waiting for a perfect governance tool or a definitive regulatory framework that may never arrive. They are analyzing the risk to the point of stagnation, allowing more agile competitors to capture the early market share and define the new standards of efficiency. They treat AI like a nuclear reactor, something so inherently dangerous that it must be encased in lead and hidden behind a dozen layers of red tape. But in a global economy, silence is a strategy of retreat. You cannot wait for absolute certainty in a field that iterates every 90 days. At the other end of the spectrum, we have the overly aggressive rollout. These are the leaders who are so desperate for the ROI that they ignore the structural warnings. They bypass the IT help desk, ignore the audit team's concerns, and push for a turn it on for everyone approach. They see governance as a hurdle to be cleared rather than the infrastructure that enables speed. This is how you end up with a high-profile breach or a commercial disaster. When you deploy without a risk-tiered model, you are not being bold, you are being reckless. You are betting the company's reputation on the hope that a junior analyst will not find a way to prompt inject their way into the executive payroll spreadsheet. The bridge between these two extremes is the move from policy theater to operational reality. Executives need to stop asking if they can trust the AI and start asking if they can trust their own governance engine. Trust is not a feeling. It is a measurable state of the system. It is the result of seeing the Purview hub show zero sensitive interactions in a high-risk department. It is the result of knowing that your Tier 0 remediation is complete and your Tier 1 users are properly trained. When you have the telemetry to prove that your guardrails are working, the paradox dissolves. You no longer have to choose between safety and speed because the safety is what makes the speed possible. We have to realize that this paradox is often rooted in a lack of technical literacy at the top. If a leader does not understand how a RAG pipeline works, they will naturally default to fear. They see the AI as a mysterious black box that might betray them at any moment. Governance training for executives is therefore a critical part of the rollout. They need to understand the why behind the DLP blocks. They need to see the how of label propagation. When they understand the mechanics of the control plane, they can move from a posture of suspicion to a posture of informed oversight. They can stop being the bottleneck and start being the architect of the transformation. This shift in executive mindset is the final unlock for the organization. It allows the IT team to move from defensive blocking to strategic enablement. It provides the political cover needed to do the hard work of data cleanup. It turns the governance framework from a compliance checkbox into a competitive advantage. But as we look at how this trust is built throughout the company, we have to look at the first line of defense for the end user. We have to look at the department that feels the impact of every deployment decision first. To bridge the gap between executive vision and user reality, we have to look at the IT help desk. Copilot's impact on the IT help desk. The IT help desk is the exact spot where your governance strategy finally hits the wall of human reality. It is the one department that feels every single mistake you made back in Tier 0. If your permissions are messy, the help desk gets the call, and if your training is lacking, the help desk gets the ticket. But as we move toward 2026, the help desk is undergoing a fundamental shift in its operational DNA. We are seeing a world where the help desk is no longer just a fix-it shop. It is becoming a diagnostic center for the entire digital estate. Let's look at the numbers. Organizations are currently seeing a deflection of 15 to 25% of simple how-to tickets. These are the Tier 0 queries that used to clog up the queue, like asking how to sync a folder or where to find the MFA reset. Users are now asking Copilot these questions directly in Teams or the M365 app, and the AI is surfacing the right documentation in seconds. This is a massive win for efficiency. It is the self-service dream we have been chasing for 20 years, finally realized through a natural language interface. But here is the shift. When you deflect the easy tickets, the ticket mix changes. The help desk isn't getting less busy, it is getting more focused. The remaining 75% of tickets are the complex ones. They are the configuration errors, the access violations, and the deep system faults that an AI simply cannot solve. This means your help desk agents need a higher level of technical skill than they did 2 years ago. They are no longer following a script for password resets. They are performing forensic analysis on your governance engine. This is where agent assistance comes in. Your IT staff are using Copilot to manage this increased complexity. Think about a ticket with a 3-week history involving 10 different emails and 5 different chat threads across 3 different agents. In the old model, a new agent would spend 20 minutes just reading the history to understand the problem. Now, they ask Copilot to summarize the timeline. They get the Cliff Notes version of the troubleshooting steps already taken, and they see the exact moment the configuration changed. But we have to be careful. There is a real risk of overtrusting the summary. If an agent relies entirely on the AI's interpretation of a ticket, they might miss the subtle hint that a user dropped in the 3rd email. They might miss the specific error code that the model deemed irrelevant. Governance for the help desk means enforcing a verify the summary rule. The AI provides the map, but the human must still walk the ground. You cannot outsource the diagnostic judgment to a model that doesn't understand your unique infrastructure quirks. The real boom is happening in knowledge management. Historically, IT teams hated writing KB articles because it was the task that always got pushed to Friday afternoon and then forgotten. Now, agents are using Copilot to draft articles 3 times faster than before. They finish a ticket, hit a button, and the AI generates a structured how-to guide based on the resolution steps they just took. This creates a virtuous cycle. Better documentation leads to better AI self-service, which leads to fewer tickets. You are building a self-healing knowledge base in real time. This turns the help desk into a service improvement hub. Instead of just closing tickets, the team is using AI to spot systemic policy gaps. They are asking the model what the top 5 reasons are for people hitting DLP blocks this week. If the answer is that finance is trying to share spreadsheets with the external audit team, then you don't have a technical problem, you have a policy problem or a training gap. The help desk provides the data that allows you to refine your governance in Tier 0. This shift is about more than just speed, it is about the health of the system. The help desk is the feedback loop for your entire AI strategy. If your tickets are spiking, your governance is failing, but if your deflection is high, your foundation is working. You are moving from reactive support to proactive posture management. The help desk is the pulse of the organization, and right now that pulse is telling us that the underlying models are evolving faster than our ability to manage them. We have to look at where this roadmap is taking us. Critiquing the 2026 roadmap, Microsoft is betting the farm on what they call agentic automation. If you look at the 2026 roadmap, the shift is clear. We are moving away from a chat box that simply answers questions and toward a system of autonomous agents that can actually perform tasks. So they want an environment where your AI doesn't just draft the email, but monitors the response and updates the CRM without you ever touching a keyboard. It sounds like the ultimate productivity unlock, but as we look at the actual trajectory of these features, we have to ask a difficult question. Is this roadmap designed for the reality of your data, or is it designed for a sanitized lab environment that doesn't exist in the Fortune 500? Gartner has been vocal about this gap. Their 2026 critique is a sobering reality check for anyone caught up in the vendor hype. They point out that while the technology is maturing at a breakneck pace, organizational readiness is still the primary bottleneck. In their latest survey of IT leaders, 40% of organizations are still stuck in the pilot phase. Even more telling, only 5% of those who finished their pilots are actually moving to a larger deployment this year. That is a massive disconnect. Microsoft is building a penthouse suite of agentic features, but most enterprises are still struggling to lay a stable foundation in the basement. One of the major wins on the 2026 roadmap is deep citations. This is Microsoft's answer to the trust problem. The system will now point to the exact source passage, the specific paragraph, and the specific version of the file it used to generate an answer. On paper, this solves the hallucination risk, but here's the structural flaw. Deep citations are only as good as the content they reference. If your SharePoint is a graveyard of outdated and duplicate documents, the citations will lead your users into a hall of mirrors. You are providing a high-resolution map of a landfill. The roadmap assumes your content is structured and fresh. Then we have the Excel agent mode. The roadmap promises that Copilot will soon be able to perform complex financial modeling and variance analysis autonomously. It is supposed to replace the manual labor of the junior analyst, but Gartner argues that this increases the data loss risk exponentially. If an agent has the power to synthesize data across multiple spreadsheets and then push that synthesis into a presentation, you have created a massive new exfiltration path. If the governance isn't perfect, the agent might inadvertently combine a public sales report with a private executive compensation sheet. The roadmap focuses on the how, but ignores the where. We are seeing a chasm between vendor reality and enterprise reality. Microsoft is selling a world of seamless integration where every app talks to every other app through a unified intelligence layer. But in your world, you have legacy systems, fragmented departments, and a decade of data debt that hasn't been paid. You have thousands of SharePoint sites with everyone permissions that were never cleaned up. The 2026 roadmap doesn't solve this. It actually makes it worse by giving the AI more power to traverse those messy connections. It is like putting a high-performance engine into a car with rusty brakes. The roadmap also highlights multi-model flexibility, allowing the system to choose the best LLM for a specific task. While this is great for performance, it creates a nightmare for the audit team. If different parts of a complex business process are being handled by different models, how do you ensure consistent governance? How do you maintain a unified audit trail when the reasoning is being handed off between various architectures? We are adding layers of complexity to a system that we already struggle to monitor effectively. We are prioritizing model choice over model accountability. Ultimately, the 2026 roadmap is a magnificent vision of what AI could be. But for the IT leader, it is a set of new responsibilities that arrive before the old ones are settled. You are being asked to govern agents before you have finished governing the chat. You are being asked to manage deep citations before you have finished labeling your data. The roadmap is a call to action, but it isn't a shortcut. It is a reminder that technology will always move faster than the organization. We have to find a way to handle the inevitable exceptions to the rules. This requires a shift from rigid enforcement to a more flexible, context-aware management style that can accommodate the messy reality of a modern global business environment. Access must be secured by default, but we need a clear path for the exceptions that drive innovation. This leads us to the final piece of the technical puzzle. We need to talk about how we manage the inevitable deviations from the plan, managing DLP and governance exceptions. The rigid wall of a no eventually cracks under the pressure of a business that needs to move. If your governance is a frozen block of ice, people will just find a way to melt it or walk around it. We have to talk about the reality of exceptions. In a global enterprise, there is no such thing as a perfect universal rule. There is always a high-value project that needs to touch a restricted data source, and there is always a specialized team that needs to bypass a standard DLP block to close a critical gap. The goal of a modern architect isn't to prevent every exception, but rather to manage them so they don't become the new default. The mantra for this is simple: secure by default, allow by exception. It sounds like a basic security principle, but in the context of Copilot, it is a structural requirement. You start with the most restrictive posture possible. You assume that no AI agent should have access to external connectors, and you assume that no prompt should be allowed to touch a highly confidential label. This is your baseline. From this position of strength, you can then evaluate specific requests. But here's the catch: the exception must be earned, not just requested. Most organizations fail because their exception process is a who-you-know system. If a vice president asks for a block to be lifted, the admin does it. And that's how your governance architecture turns into a pile of loose bricks. To fix this, every exception must be tied directly to your sensitivity label taxonomy. You don't grant an exception to a person. You grant it to a specific data classification within a specific context. If the finance team needs Copilot to analyze a restricted M&A folder, you don't lower the guardrails for the whole department. You create a time-bound, scoped environment where that specific label is temporarily accessible to a verified group of users. This is a critical distinction. An exception shouldn't be a permanent change to your tenant settings, but instead, it should be a temporary lease on a specific capability. Once the project is over, the door closes, and the governance engine resets to its default state. We also need to look at the soft enforcement model, especially in Copilot Studio. This is a powerful diagnostic tool that most people ignore. Instead of immediately blocking every new agent that a business user tries to build, you start in an auditing mode. You let them build, you let them connect, and you monitor every interaction. This allows you to see the shadow AI before it becomes a problem, and it lets you identify the high-value use cases that you might have missed in your initial policy design. If you see 5 different teams trying to build a similar bot for customer support, that's a signal. It tells you that there is a legitimate business need that your current secure by default posture isn't meeting. You can then design a formal, governed solution that replaces those 5 ad hoc bots. This approach turns your audit logs into a roadmap for enablement. You aren't just looking for bad actors, you're looking for unmet needs. When you finally move from soft enforcement to a hard block, you do it with the data to prove why it's necessary. You can show the business that you've analyzed their work and provided a safer alternative. This builds the trust we discussed earlier. The business stops seeing IT as the department of no and starts seeing them as the engine of safe speed. However, we have to be careful about tenant-wide relaxations. This is the single biggest mistake I see in 2026. An executive finds a friction point in Word, and the IT team fixes it by changing a global setting in the admin center. Suddenly, a block that was protecting 10,000 people is gone because one person found it annoying. You must resist the urge to solve local problems with global changes. If a rule is broken for one person, the fix must be scoped to that person's specific environment. Use the restricted SharePoint search or adaptive scopes we talked about to create these micro-zones of flexibility. Keep the rest of the tenant under the protection of the baseline. Every exception must be documented in a central register that the internal audit team can review. If you can't explain why a specific team has a bypass, then that bypass shouldn't exist. Building a governance-aware culture. Technical controls are the hardware of your governance strategy, but culture is the operating system that actually runs the tenant. You can spend millions on E5 licenses and Purview configurations, but if your workforce treats those tools as a list of annoyances to be circumvented, your digital estate is still at risk. In the generative era, your people are the final circuit breaker. They are the ones who ultimately decide whether a prompt is appropriate or whether an AI-generated summary is safe to share with a client. If they don't understand the structural why behind the guardrails, they will fill that void with their own shortcuts. We have to move away from the outdated concept that governance is a policing action performed by IT. It has to evolve into a partnership where the business takes ownership of its own safety. This transformation requires a network of functional translators. We call them champions, but they are far more than just early adopters or fans of the technology. These are the individuals in every department, from finance to creative, who understand the specific nuances of their local workflows and the unique risks associated with their data. A champion in legal knows exactly why a specific contract shouldn't be summarized by a model with web grounding enabled, and a champion in sales knows how to use the AI to personalize a pitch without inadvertently leaking the internal margin guidelines. They don't just teach people how to prompt, they model the ethical and secure behavior that the policy requires. If your governance strategy doesn't empower these local leads to act as stewards, you are trying to manage a global system with a single central lens that can't see the local detail. We need a fundamental rebranding of the word governance. It shouldn't be perceived as a barrier or a series of speed bumps. It needs to be understood as infrastructure. Think about a high-speed rail system. The tracks and the signaling aren't there to limit the train's velocity. They are there to make that velocity possible. Without them, the train would be a danger to itself and everyone around it. That is what a governance-aware culture provides. It creates a stable, predictable environment where the right way to use AI is also the most efficient way. When your employees realize that these controls actually protect their professional reputation and make their output more reliable, the cultural friction starts to dissipate. They stop viewing the security team as a warden and start seeing them as the engineers who built the tracks that allow them to move at machine speed. This leads us to the concept of responsible AI by design. This isn't a separate compliance meeting you hold once a quarter to satisfy an auditor. It is a mindset that must be baked into every prompt, every agent, and every automated workflow. In 2026, the most successful organizations are those where employees take personal pride in the integrity of their AI interactions. They understand that a hallucination isn't just a technical quirk. It is a failure of the human verification process. They treat the model with a healthy level of professional skepticism, knowing that the human in the loop isn't a legal burden. It is the only thing that gives the AI's output any actual business value. They recognize that their expertise is the filter that turns raw machine logic into a defensible business deliverable. We are moving toward a world of distributed accountability. Every employee who holds a Copilot license is now, in effect, a data manager. They aren't just consumers of information, they are the orchestrators of the company's intelligence. They need to understand the weight of that shift. If they build a custom agent to automate a customer-facing interaction, they are the ones who must be the first line of audit for its performance. They are the front line of the digital estate. When this cultural shift takes root, your internal risk profile drops more than any technical block could ever achieve. You have moved from a posture of rigid enforcement to a posture of shared stewardship. This cultural maturity is the ultimate goal of the architect. It is the final piece of the puzzle that turns a high-powered tool into a sustainable, competitive advantage for the entire organization. Implementation and future pacing. So where do you actually start? You need a 90-day blueprint because you can't just flip a switch and expect things to work. That approach leads to the commercial disasters we talked about. So day 1 to 30 has to be about tier 0. This is the remediation phase where you aren't giving out licenses yet, but instead you are running oversharing baseline reports to see the damage. You are identifying every single everyone except external users group that has access to sensitive sites, and you're finally finding those anyone with the link shares that have been sitting in your OneDrive for 5 years. And this is the structural cleanup, and if you skip this part, you are building your entire strategy on sand. You are essentially giving an AI a flashlight to find every sensitive file you forgot to delete, which is why this month is when you finally pay your data debt. You have to look at the toxic combinations where highly sensitive data meets broad internal access, and then you fix the permissions before moving files to the right sites. This is the work that nobody wants to do, but it's the only work that actually matters in the long run. You can't skip the cleanup or ignore the permissions because the AI will eventually expose the truth. Day 31 to 60 is when you apply the technical logic. You use restricted SharePoint search as your interim safety net while tagging your sites with AI-specific properties. You define which repositories are AI eligible. This is the shift.